The mornings in Canada carried a kind of stillness that Meghan had never known before. There were no engines humming outside the palace walls, no flashbulbs bursting behind drawn curtains. The air smelled of pine and sea salt. Each day began not with formality, but with birdsong. Meghan would wake early, wrap herself in a wool cardigan, and walk barefoot across the cold wooden floor to make tea. Through the kitchen window, she watched the sun rise slowly over the ocean, a ribbon of pink and gold stretching into the horizon. Harry was often already awake, holding Archie near the fireplace, his laughter filling the quiet room. It was a different kind of life, smaller, simpler, but achingly real. She cooked breakfast with her own hands, stirring eggs and humming softly, sometimes surprised by how natural it felt to live without assistants or schedules. There was a peace in imperfection, a cup left unwashed, a toy on the floor, a pot of soup simmering without ceremony. Freedom, Meghan realized, wasn't about grand gestures or political statements. It was about the quiet permission to be ordinary again, to breathe without fear, to smile without calculation, to exist without performance. Even thousands of miles from Buckingham Palace, Meghan could still hear the echo of it, the murmurs, the judgment, the endless curiosity of strangers. The tabloids continued to chase their story like hunters in the dark. They left the crown but not the spotlight, one headline read. At first, she tried to ignore it. She focused on small things, morning walks, long talks with Harry, the warmth of Archie's hand in hers. But the noise always found its way in. Some nights, she'd scroll through headlines, not out of vanity, but disbelief. How could people who had never met her feel so entitled to her truth? She reminded herself that the world often misunderstands what it cannot control. Still, the scrutiny stung. She learned to close her laptop, to step outside into the cold, and to look up at the stars instead of the screens. In those moments, the universe felt vast enough to hold her pain and her hope together. Harry was her constant reassurance. They'll never know the real you, Head told her softly one evening, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But I do, and that's enough. And for the first time in a long time, she believed him. When they finally moved to California, it felt like stepping into light after years in shadow. The house they chose wasn't royal or grand, but surrounded by wild lavender, olive trees, and the endless hum of cicadas in the warm evening air. The first night, Meghan opened every window and let the scent of jasmine drift inside. The walls were bare at first, just laughter, echoes, and possibility. Slowly, she filled the home with small touches. Framed photos of Diana, Archie's drawings, a jar of shells from their Canadian walks. In the mornings, sunlight poured through open windows, bathing the wooden floors in gold. Meghan often spent hours in the garden, planting seeds with her son. Everything grows with care, she whispered to him as his tiny hands pressed soil around the roots. California wasn't just home, it was healing. For the first time, she could walk outside without fear. She wore simple linen dresses, her hair loose, her smile unguarded. Sometimes, while watching Harry teach Archie how to chase butterflies, Meghan thought, this was what she had always wanted, not luxury, but peace. She had traded titles for truth, and in that trade, found herself again. Out of quiet reflection, purpose bloomed. Meghan and Harry spent long evenings talking about what they could build, something lasting, something good. Thus, Archwell was born. It wasn't an institution of power, but of heart. They wanted to create a foundation that healed what fame had broken, a place where compassion could turn into action. Meghan poured herself into the work with renewed spirit. Her speeches were no longer scripted by palace advisors. They came from the core of her experience. "We don't need to be perfect," she said once, her voice steady. "We just need to be brave enough to begin." Archwell became a mirror of her soul, blending empathy with purpose, advocacy with grace. She met survivors, activists, and young women who saw her not as a Duchess, but as a reflection of themselves, flawed, resilient, hopeful. In those moments, Meghan found meaning again. The world still judged, still whispered, but now the noise felt smaller compared to the quiet truth of doing good. The crown she once wore had been heavy. The one she carried now, invisible but real, rested lightly on her heart. Motherhood deepened everything. With Archie growing and little Lilibet arriving soon, Meghan's world revolved around love in its simplest form. The sound of small footsteps, the weight of tiny arms around her neck, the quiet peace of bedtime stories. Some mornings were chaotic, toys scattered, dogs barking, Harry laughing from the kitchen, but they were real, and that reality was her salvation. She wanted her children to grow up knowing kindness, not crowns, compassion, not comparison. When she sang lullabies, she sang softly about courage, not of princes or battles, but of hearts that refused to break. Meghan often thought about her mother, Doria, who had raised her with strength and serenity. She taught me grace, Meghan would say, and grace is what saves you when nothing else does. There were still echoes of the old world, headlines, gossip, criticism. But they could no longer reach her. She had built something stronger around herself, a family grounded in love, laughter, and peace. And when she looked into Archie's eyes, she knew, leaving the palace hadn't been an escape. It had been a return to life. Even in her newfound peace, Meghan could not escape the long shadow of fame. Some days, the quiet hum of her California home was broken by the sharp ring of her phone. Another article, another headline, another stranger with an opinion about her life. It amazed her how people still clung to the old narrative, as if she were a character trapped in a royal drama that never ended. Why do they still care so much? She asked Harry one evening, standing by the window as the sunset bled into the hills. Because you make them feel something, he replied softly. People don't know what to do with someone who refuses to fit. That truth stayed with her. Fame, she realized, wasn't a crown you could take off. It was a mirror held up to the world, reflecting its love and its cruelty alike. Meghan learned to face it differently now. Instead of fighting every rumor, she chose stillness. Instead of defending her choices, she let her actions speak. The tabloids might twist her smile, but they could no longer steal its meaning. Let them write, she whispered to herself. I'll live. And she did, quietly, steadily, with grace that no headline could diminish. In 2021, the world paused to listen. Meghan sat beneath a blooming pergola in California, sunlight filtering through green leaves, across from Oprah Winfrey. For once, the conversation wasn't about gossip, it was about truth. Were you silent, or were you silenced? Oprah asked, her voice low but steady. Meghan's eyes glistened as she replied, the latter. The honesty in her tone was disarming. She didn't shout, didn't accuse, she simply told her story. She spoke of loneliness, of the weight of expectation, of nights when she had felt invisible inside the palace walls. I just didn't want to be alive anymore, she admitted, her voice trembling. The words echoed across the world, through living rooms and headlines, through hearts that recognized the quiet despair of being unseen. For women of her mother's generation, for grandmothers, mothers, daughters, it wasn't just Meghan's pain they heard, it was their own. The interview became more than television, it became confession, redemption, and release. Meghan didn't seek sympathy. She sought understanding, and in speaking her truth, she gave countless others permission to do the same. After the interview, the world divided once again. Some praised her courage, others condemned her candor. The same cycle of judgment returned, but this time, Meghan stood taller. They'll interpret what they want, she told a friend, but I know why I spoke. Letters poured in from women across continents. From widows in small towns, nurses on night shifts, grandmothers who had once been told to stay quiet. They thanked her for her honesty, for showing that pain can exist even behind diamonds. Meghan read each letter slowly, often with tears. I see you, she whispered to the pages, knowing how much those words had once meant to her. The noise of the press no longer mattered as much, the connection she'd made with ordinary people did. They didn't see her as a duchess or a celebrity. They saw her as a woman who had walked through fire and emerged still graceful, and that, Meghan thought, was the real legacy, not power, but empathy, not fame, but understanding. In her public speeches now, Meghan no longer spoke as a royal or a figure of controversy, but as a woman speaking to other women. Her voice carried warmth, the kind that comes from surviving heartbreak without bitterness. "We are not defined by what we leave behind," she said once, "but by what we choose to build after." Older women in the audience nodded, some wiping tears, hearing in her words the echoes of their own stories, of love, of loss, of courage reclaimed. Meghan talked about healing, about kindness, about dignity that comes from choosing peace over revenge. She didn't pretend to have all the answers. She spoke from scars, not scripts. Strength, she told them, isn't about never breaking. It's about growing back softer. Her sincerity made silence fall across rooms. For many watching from their homes, especially those long accustomed to swallowing their own pain, her calm defiance felt like a balm. Meghan had once been silenced. Nowhere voice had become a song of quiet resilience, one that reached across generations. Years later, as the sun set over the Santa Barbara hills, Meghan stood in her garden watching her children chase each other through the grass. The air was filled with laughter, lavender, and the distant call of the ocean. Harry approached, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. For a moment, everything was still. She thought of the girl she had been, the actress, the Duchess, the woman who had once stood at palace windows longing for air. She smiled. "We made it," she whispered. The journey hadn't been perfect. It had been painful, public, and unpredictable. But it had been hers. She had learned that freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you build, piece by piece, through courage, faith, and love. The world would always have its opinions. But as she looked at her family, at the life they had built from ruins, Meghan knew she no longer needed approval, only gratitude. The crown had taught her about duty, but life beyond it had taught her about grace. And as twilight fell, Meghan Markle, no longer a duchess, no longer a symbol, simply closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and let peace settle where pain had once lived.